At the family gathering, my father asked with surprise, "Sweetheart, why did you come in a taxi? Did the car I gave you for your birthday break down?" Before I could answer, my husband said with a smirk, "That car belongs to my mother now. She needed it more." My father fell silent for a moment, and what he did next filled me with profound pride. Before we begin, friends who are watching this story, please leave a comment saying which city you are watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so this page can grow and bring you even more interesting stories. That afternoon, the main estate of the James Turner family in Beverly Hills was enveloped in a warm yet imposing atmosphere. The grand mansion of modern architecture bustled with the aroma of delicious food emanating from the central dining hall and the laughter of relatives. It was the monthly family gathering, an event the relatives always looked forward to with great anticipation. In the wide gravel driveway, a fleet of foreign luxury cars was parked in perfect order. From the latest European sedans to massive SUVs that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, they all gleamed, reflecting the sun's rays filtering through the dark clouds that had suddenly covered the clear California sky. Inside, uncles, aunts, and cousins enjoyed a buffet served by the best catering company in Los Angeles. However, amidst all that opulence, one chair at the main table, right next to Derek Parker, was empty. Derek, comfortably seated in his carved teakwood chair, showed no sign of waiting for his wife, who had not yet arrived. On the contrary, he was completely absorbed in enjoying a Wagyu steak on his plate. From time to time, he let out a loud laugh at a joke made by his cousin. Dressed in a designer silk shirt and a flashy gold watch, he tried hard to fit in with his wife's family of tycoons in their own right. Derek always felt he had to prove he deserved to be there, even though everyone in that room knew that his management position in the company was a gift from his father-in-law, CEO James Turner. His overly confident and somewhat arrogant attitude often made some relatives uncomfortable, but they kept quiet out of respect for Mr. Turner, known for his patience and wisdom. Outside the high walls of the estate, a dark blue taxi slowly pulled up. A light drizzle began to fall, dampening the hot asphalt. The taxi door opened, and Chloe stepped out. She looked beautiful, but seemed a bit overwhelmed. The taxi's credit card reader wasn't working, so she had to rummage through her purse to pay the fare in cash. Then she hurried out, covering her head with her handbag to prevent her pastel-toned dress from getting soaked. There was no personal chauffeur to open the door for her, nor an umbrella to welcome her. Chloe ran across the wide courtyard toward the main entrance, passing by her family's luxury cars. When she reached the imposing front door, she was slightly out of breath. She fixed her clothes, brushed the raindrops off her shoulders, and, after taking a deep breath to calm herself, walked into the lion's den, full of inquisitive stares. A brief silence fell over the central hall when Chloe entered, before the murmur of conversations resumed, although noticeably lower. All eyes were on her. Chloe's appearance was simple yet elegant, in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding her. Her face showed fatigue. Dark circles betrayed her exhaustion, although she tried to hide it with a faint smile. She approached her father, CEO Turner, who presided over the table as the patriarch of the family. "Mr." Turner observed his daughter with a sharp but loving gaze. He noticed that her shoes were slightly stained from the rain and that the hem of her dress was damp. His paternal instinct immediately detected the troubles his daughter had been trying to hide. Mr. Turner slowly put down his spoon, and the delicate sound it made seemed to resonate with special force in the ears of everyone present. He looked at Chloe, who had just kissed his cheek respectfully, and then shifted his gaze to Derek, who continued chewing his food with delight without having bothered to stand up or pull out the chair for his wife. "Mr." Turner cleared his throat softly, and that was enough for the conversation at the table to cease completely. With his baritone voice, calm but imposing, he asked a question, a simple question, that would change his son-in-law's destiny forever. He asked why Chloe was late and why she looked soaked, as if she had come on public transport. especially when he had just given her a very special birthday gift for her comfort. Mr. Turner asked with feigned curiosity about the whereabouts of the brand-new Mercedes-Benz S-Class he had sent her the week before. Had it broken down, forcing Chloe to take a taxi in the bad weather? Chloe remained silent. Her lips trembled slightly. She still hadn't found the right words to cover up her husband's behavior, as she didn't want to embarrass him in front of the whole family. Chloe was an obedient wife. She always tried to protect her husband's reputation, even though her heart broke frequently. However, before a single word came out of Chloe's mouth, Derek interrupted the conversation with his mouth half full. With a very relaxed attitude and not a trace of guilt, Derek answered his father-in-law's question. He said loudly that the Mercedes-Benz S-Class was now in the hands of his mother, Mrs. Pamela Parker. Derek explained, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world, that his mother needed a large, luxurious car so she wouldn't be looked down upon by her friends at the country club. He added an argument that made the blood boil of those listening, that Chloe, who only went to the office and dressed simply, should live modestly, and that taking an Uber was more practical and convenient since she didn't have to look for parking. The room grew even quieter than before. The uncles and aunts looked at each other in disbelief. They knew the car was a personal gift from Mr. Turner to his only daughter, Chloe, not for her mother-in-law, famous for her vanity. Derek's words were not only disrespectful, but they showed a total disregard for his wife and a lack of awareness of his place before the person who had given the gift. Chloe lowered her head, holding back extreme embarrassment. She wasn't ashamed of coming in a taxi, but rather that her husband was so proudly displaying his stupidity in front of her own father. She clutched the hem of her dress, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her. Her heart ached hearing how her husband prioritized his mother's image over his wife's comfort. However, Mr. Turner's reaction was completely unexpected to Derek. Chloe's father didn't slam the table, he didn't yell, he didn't even flush with anger. Mr. Turner remained silent for a moment, observing his son-in-law, as if examining a strange insect. Then, a faint smile appeared on his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He nodded slowly, as if he understood the twisted logic Derek had just laid out. In a neutral tone, Mr. Turner said he now understood why Mrs. Pamela was using the car, and that he appreciated Derek's honesty. Derek, interpreting his father-in-law's reaction as a sign of approval, or at least the helplessness of an old man facing the younger generation, smiled smugly. He felt victorious, as if he had successfully managed his wife's family assets without any resistance. Under the table covered with a silk tablecloth, Mr. Turner's hand moved slowly to pull his smartphone out of his suit pants pocket. Without even looking at the screen, his fingers opened a corporate messaging app and typed a brief order for his company's security and operations team. Not many words were needed. A single sentence was enough to activate the asset recovery protocol. The message was sent instantly, unleashing a destructive storm upon Derek and his mother. Mr. Turner put his smartphone back, lifted his coffee cup, and took a sip with delight, as if he had just signed a very lucrative business contract. His eyes rested gently on Chloe, sending her a silent signal that everything would be fine, that her father had the situation under control. Derek, oblivious to everything, continued eating greedily, unaware that the sword of Damocles was hanging over his head, ready to nip his arrogance in the bud. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a contrasting scene was unfolding at a luxury shopping mall in Beverly Hills, a meeting point for LA's high society. Not even the cloudy sky could dampen Mrs. Pamela Parker's desire to show off her new toy. In the VIP drop-off zone of the majestic main lobby, a gleaming black Mercedes-Benz S-Class was parked, deliberately a bit crooked so everyone would see it. Mrs. Pamela stood next to the car with her chin held high. She was dressed head to toe in clashing colors. In a clumsy attempt to flaunt luxury brand logos, a fake crocodile skin bag hung from her arm, and her fingers were loaded with excessively shiny gold rings. Around her, 5 of her friends from the country club watched her with varied expressions. some with admiration, others with envy, and some who, knowing the modest origins of Pamela's family, snickered discreetly. But today, the stage belonged to Pamela. She purposefully raised her voice to tell everyone that this grand, magnificent car was a special gift from her beloved son, Derek. She bragged that Derek's business was booming, so much so that he was able to buy her this nearly $150,000 car in cash, with no financing. She patted the hood of the car as if patting her son on the back, boasting about the comfortable heated and ventilated seats and the state-of-the-art audio system. She didn't mention Chloe's name at all, as if her daughter-in-law hadn't contributed anything to her son's success. Her friends showered her with fake praise, which further inflated Pamela's ego. They praised what a good son Derek was, and how lucky Pamela was to have such a successful child who respected his parents. Pamela absorbed all the compliments like a sponge, feeling on top of the world. She even allowed herself to drop a hint to one of her friends, who had arrived in an older sedan, suggesting it was about time to change cars for safety and comfort. Satisfied after almost half an hour of exhibiting, Pamela finally decided to end the gathering. She said goodbye with as much elegance as possible, stating she had to go to her usual beauty salon for a facial treatment. Pamela pressed the button on the handle to open the car door and slid into the cool interior that smelled of new leather. She sat in the driver's seat, straightening her back to appear taller, and waved once more to her friends, who were still on the lobby sidewalk, watching her departure. With total confidence, Pamela pushed the start button, but that was where her nightmare began. Instead of the smooth roar of the engine, a long, high-pitched, deafening alarm sounded. The instrument panel, which normally glowed with futuristic graphics, turned completely red. All the warning lights flashed simultaneously like a broken disco ball, creating an atmosphere of panic in the confined cabin. Before Pamela could understand what was happening, the automated voice of the car's computer system echoed loudly through the premium speakers she had bragged so much about. The voice was cold, monotonous, and robotic, but the message was crystal clear. Alert. Unauthorized use of asset detected. Security system activated. Engine permanently immobilized by administrator. The voice repeated over and over. Pamela panicked. She pressed the start button repeatedly, stomped on the brake pedal, and even hit the steering wheel with the palms of her hands, but the car was completely dead, like an expensive piece of junk. Her face began to pale, and a cold sweat ran down her forehead, ruining her thick makeup. The situation became even more humiliating when the car's security system started honking the horn at regular intervals like an anti-theft alarm. The loud noise echoing throughout the high-ceilinged mall lobby attracted everyone's attention. Mall security guards, passing visitors, valet drivers, and, of course, Pamela's friends who hadn't left yet, all stared at the Mercedes. Pamela's friends, who had admired her earlier, now began to whisper and hold back laughter, seeing Pamela like a fish in a bowl, frantically banging on the windows from the inside. Pamela tried to open the door to escape the embarrassment, but the central locking system, controlled remotely by Mr. Turner's IT team, had locked her in automatically. She was trapped in her own luxury car, turned into a free spectacle for hundreds of pairs of eyes. At Mr. Turner's corporate headquarters, a young IT specialist stared at his monitor with an impassive face. He had just executed a priority order from the company owner. On his screen, the status of the vehicle with that license plate indicated, "Locked, unauthorized user." The employee typed the next command, "Unlock the doors," after a 3-minute interval for maximum psychological impact, and at the same time, send its current location signal to the asset recovery team that was already on standby in the area. Far away, in the mall lobby, those 3 minutes felt like 3 years to Pamela. She saw her friends pull out their phones, not to help, but to record the ridiculous incident. She screamed for help, but her voice was muffled by the car's soundproof windows. She cried hysterically. Her eye makeup ran, turning into a black liquid streaking down her cheeks. shattering the high society lady image she had worked so hard to build. When the door locks finally released automatically with a loud click, Pamela didn't step out immediately. She was too exhausted and in shock. But she had no other choice, because in the distance, a bright orange tow truck bearing the logo of a massive corporation was already entering the lobby area, making its way through the crowd. The employees who stepped out of the truck were not your typical scruffy tow truck drivers. They were two heavily built security agents with resolute faces, dressed in black tactical corporate uniforms. They carried a clipboard with legal asset seizure documents and walked with a firm step directly toward Pamela's car. It was then that Pamela realized this wasn't a simple engine malfunction. It was a counterattack, and she was on the front lines of the battlefield, with no weapon other than her already shattered pride. The atmosphere in the mall lobby, normally bustling with visitor activity, had now transformed into a scene of tension and comedy. The arrival of the massive orange tow truck, with its emergency lights flashing silently, parted the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. On both sides of the truck, the name of the corporate conglomerate owned by Chloe's father was clearly inscribed, a highly respected name in the American business world. The two burly security agents who stepped out were not ordinary workers. They wore impeccable black uniforms, with the company insignia on their chests and communication earpieces. Their faces were flat, cold, and professional, and there wasn't an ounce of hesitation in their steps as they headed toward the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, stopped in the middle of the VIP drop-off. Pamela was still trapped in the car, breathing heavily. The car's tinted windows prevented her from clearly seeing the expressions of the people outside, but she could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed on her. Her heart pounded, a mix of fear and whatever pride she had left. One of the security agents knocked firmly on the driver's window, startling Pamela. She tried to yell at them to go away, but her voice didn't penetrate the glass. The agent didn't waste time. He pulled out a small electronic device and brought it close to the door handle. Immediately, the car lock popped open with a loud click. The driver's door swung wide open, letting the hot air from the lobby and the murmur of the crowd into the cool cabin. The security agent leaned in slightly, but there was no trace of kindness in his tone. He asked Mrs. Pamela to step out of the vehicle, as they needed to secure the corporate asset immediately. Pamela, feeling her pride trampled, exploded in rage. She gripped the steering wheel with all her might and refused to move. With a cracking voice, she screamed that the car belonged to her son Derek and that no one had the right to take it away. She threatened to call the LAPD and report them for grand theft auto. Pamela's hysterical screams echoed off the lobby ceiling, and mall visitors stepped even closer to see who this middle-aged woman throwing such a tantrum was. Several people took out their smartphones, opened their cameras, and began recording the embarrassing incident in real time. The security agent was not swayed by emotions. He calmly pulled out a plastic folder containing official documents. He showed the stamped and signed asset recovery order. With a voice loud enough for the front row of the crowd to hear, he explained that the vehicle in question was registered as an operational asset of Mr. James Turner's corporation, and that it was currently being misused by an individual without written authorization. The words corporate asset and misused rang in the ears of Pamela's friends who were still standing on the sidewalk, stunned. Their expressions shifted from confusion to disgust. The rumor began to spread that the luxury car Pamela bragged about was actually her in-laws' company car, not the fruit of her son's success. Since Pamela continued to resist and refused to get out, the security agents finally took firm action following protocol. One agent signaled his partner. With agility, but without harming her, they pried Pamela's hands off the steering wheel. Pamela kicked her legs like a spoiled child. Her feet flailed in the air, but the strength of a middle-aged woman who barely exercised was no match for two trained guards. In a matter of seconds, Pamela was dragged out. She stumbled and would have fallen onto the asphalt if she hadn't grabbed onto a lobby pillar to keep her balance. Her knockoff bag dropped, and its contents spilled across the floor. Cheap lipstick, crumpled tissues, and a bulky wallet containing only shopping receipts. The next scene was the culmination of all the humiliation. The tow truck operator quickly hooked up the front bumper of the Mercedes. The towing machinery roared and smoothly lifted the massive car onto the truck's flatbed. Pamela ran and banged on the side of the truck, crying and begging them not to take the car. She screamed Derek's name as if her son would suddenly appear to save her, but no hero arrived. The truck slowly drove away, taking with it the status symbol Pamela felt so proud of. She was left alone in the middle of the driveway. Her once elaborate hairstyle was now undone, and her running mascara gave her a ghostly appearance in broad daylight. No one around her helped. They were too busy uploading videos of the incident to social media. One of Pamela's friends, a sharp-tongued woman whom Pamela had previously looked down on for her older car, walked up with a sarcastic smile. She didn't offer a hand to help Pamela up, but simply said in a low, cutting voice, "Looks like your son's car had a business emergency. Why don't you call an Uber?" The comment elicited giggles from the other friends. Pamela looked around with glassy eyes. Her world, built on lies, had collapsed. A visitor's phone dinged with a notification. A video of Mrs. Pamela being dragged out by security guards, uploaded to a local LA gossip page, was reaching thousands of views in minutes. The headline was painfully cruel. High society lady's ride turns out to be in-laws' corporate lease. Back at Mr. Turner's mansion, the party atmosphere remained serene, in stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded in the mall lobby. A soft piano melody played in the background for the guests enjoying dessert. Chloe sat silently in her chair. Her eyes stared blankly at the empty plate in front of her, trying to ignore the sound of her husband chewing greedily next to her. Derek looked very relaxed. Occasionally, he let out a small burp without covering his mouth, feeling like a little king in his father-in-law's house. Having successfully answered Mr. Turner's question without any argument, he didn't know that the calm in that room was the calm before a massive storm. Suddenly, Derek's phone, which was on the table, vibrated violently with a loud hip-hop ringtone. The sound shattered the serenity of the room, and several uncles turned with annoyed expressions. Derek quickly grabbed the phone and saw the name Mom on the screen. He smiled broadly, thinking his mother was calling to thank him for letting her show off the new car. With confidence, Derek answered the call without leaving the table so everyone could hear his conversation. But the smile vanished from Derek's face in an instant. The voice coming from the other end was not one of gratitude, but a hysterical scream mixed with inconsolable crying. Mrs. Pamela's voice was so loud that even Chloe, sitting next to him, could faintly hear it. Derek's face flushed with embarrassment, and then paled with anger. He listened to his mother's broken account, that the car had been forcefully towed by thugs, that she had been humiliated in front of her friends, and that she was now stranded on the street. Derek's narrow mind immediately concluded that it was all Chloe's doing. He thought that Chloe, feeling hurt, had secretly called the police or cancelled the car insurance. Anger consumed him. Derek slammed his spoon onto his plate, making a loud clatter, and the entire room instantly fell silent. He stood up abruptly. His chair scratched the marble floor with a loud screech. With bulging eyes, Derek pointed at Chloe's face as she sat silently. He yelled at his wife in front of the dozens of family members present. He accused Chloe of being an ungrateful wife who had humiliated her mother-in-law. Derek screamed, asking what Chloe had done to have the car taken away. The veins in Derek's neck bulged. His face was ready to spew all kinds of insults. Chloe raised her head and looked at her husband with an unreadable expression, a mix of pity and exhaustion. But before she could open her mouth to defend herself, a baritone voice sliced through Derek's rage like a hot knife through butter. Mr. Turner had stood up from his seat at the head of the table. His movements were slow and deliberate, but he carried an aura that left everyone breathless. He didn't yell. He didn't hit the table. He simply raised one hand slightly to signal Derek to shut up. Surprisingly, Derek, who was furious, fell silent. His mouth hung slightly open. Mr. Turner walked around the table. His steps were firm, As he approached his son-in-law, he stopped exactly 2 steps away from Derek and looked him in the eyes with a sharp, piercing stare, the stare of a businessman who had broken many competitors. In a neutral tone, Mr. Turner said that there was no problem with the car. He explained that the car had been repossessed because its original owner, the corporation, had determined that the current user was unqualified. Derek opened his mouth, trying to process his father-in-law's words. Mr. Turner continued, this time with an even colder tone. He said that since he heard Derek's mother needed a car, Derek should go to her immediately, as she was suffering in the heat on the street. Derek, bewildered, tried to make excuses, saying he had to go back to the office, but Mr. Turner interrupted him again. With deadly calm, Mr. Turner informed Derek of a new reality. He asked for the keys to the sedan Derek had arrived in, the company car he had been using for his errands. Derek reflexively grabbed his pants pocket, reluctant to hand over the keys. Mr. Turner cracked a faint, terrifying smile. He said that the car was an employee benefit, and since, as of 5:00 p.m. that day, Derek's name had been removed from the company payroll for gross ethical violations and misuse of assets, Derek no longer had the right to that car. The news of the termination was delivered as if Mr. Turner were discussing the weather in the middle of a family dinner. The color drained from Derek's face, and his legs felt weak. He looked at Chloe's uncles and aunts for support, but everyone looked at him with disdain and coldness. No one felt pity for him. Mr. Turner extended his hand, demanding the keys. With trembling hands, Derek reached into his pocket and handed over the keys to the sedan. It was as if he were handing over his own life. Without that car and that job, he was nothing. But the humiliation wasn't over yet. Mr. Turner took a bill out of his pocket, a crisp $50 bill. He folded the bill carefully and tucked it into the pocket of Derek's expensive shirt. Mr. Turner patted the pocket and then whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear, that the money was for him to catch a cab. A luxury Uber was too expensive, and Derek needed to learn to save, just as he had said earlier about Chloe. Mr. Turner nodded to the head of estate security, who was waiting in a corner of the room. 2 sturdy mansion guards approached. They didn't touch Derek roughly. They simply stood on either side of him, exerting intense psychological pressure for him to leave immediately. Derek looked at Chloe one last time, hoping his wife would defend him, but Chloe had already turned away. She was busy pouring a hot tea for her mother, acting as if Derek were no longer there. With a faltering step and his pride shattered, Derek was escorted out of that magnificent dining room, passing by the delicious food he hadn't finished, toward the exit. Behind him, the family's conversation slowly resumed, as if a piece of trash that was an eyesore had just been disposed of. When Derek walked out the front door of Mr. Turner's mansion, every step he took was a mix of explosive rage and gut-wrenching shame. The 2 burly security guards escorting him followed him all the way to the tall wrought-iron gate. They didn't say a word, but their glares screamed that Derek was now nothing but garbage that needed to be removed from that luxury property immediately. As the automatic gate slowly closed behind him with a heavy metallic clank, Derek felt as if the door to a life of comfort had been shut forever. He stood dazed on the outside sidewalk, looking back at the imposing house with its warm, glowing lights, the place where he should have been enjoying the rest of the evening as a beloved son-in-law, not as a fired and banished man. The sky, which had been overcast, finally unleashed its contents. It wasn't a drizzle, but a cold, intense downpour. It was as if nature itself was joining Derek's humiliation party. Derek hurriedly took shelter under a tree by the side of the road, whose leaves weren't dense enough to protect him from the onslaught of water. The expensive silk shirt bought with Chloe's supplemental credit card was now soaked and clinging to his skin. Desperate, he reached into his pants pockets and pulled out his smartphone, its screen slightly wet from the raindrops. With trembling fingers, he opened a rideshare app. He had to get out of there quickly before a neighbor or an acquaintance of his father-in-law spotted him on the street looking like a beggar. But a new problem arose. The luxury-gated community where Mr. Turner lived had very strict security rules. The rideshare app on Derek's phone showed a notification that no driver could enter the private residential area to pick him up without an access permit from the homeowner. Derek tried calling the security booth at the entrance, hoping they would lift the barrier for an Uber, but his call was rejected. His number had evidently been blocked or flagged to be ignored. He had no other choice. Derek had to walk to the main entrance of the community, almost 2 miles from where he was, a distance he would normally cover in minutes in an air-conditioned car, now stretched before him like a path of torture. Derek began walking with heavy steps. His polished leather shoes stepped into dirty puddles of water on the asphalt. Every step was a blow to his ego. The rain intensified, and a strong wind made the trees sway violently. In less than 5 minutes, Derek was completely soaked. His hair, previously styled with gel, now hung flat across his forehead. The rain ran down his face, hiding the tears of rage that began to well up. He cursed Chloe in his mind. He cursed Mr. Turner. He felt he was being treated unfairly. In his twisted logic, as a son-in-law, he had the right to enjoy those comforts, and his father-in-law's wrath was excessive over a simple car. He didn't realize that the real problem was his own accumulated shamelessness over the years. As Derek stumbled through the storm, bright car headlights illuminated his back. Derek stepped to the edge of the sidewalk, hoping it was just a passing neighbor, but the car slowed down as it approached him. It was a large pearl-white SUV, the exact same model that had been confiscated from his mother that afternoon. But this one was brand new, still bearing temporary dealer plates. Derek turned, hoping to find a bit of pity. Perhaps Mr. Turner had changed his mind and asked his driver to take him to the entrance. The car's windows were spotless, treated with the best water-repellent coating, so Derek could clearly see who was inside. At the wheel was Mr. Turner. The middle-aged man drove relaxed, one hand on the steering wheel. His face was serene and dry, enjoying the classical music faintly audible from outside. Sitting next to him was Chloe. His wife had changed into warmer clothes. Chloe was holding a thermos with a hot drink. Her face looked at peace. Time seemed to slow down as the car drove slowly past Derek. Derek stared at his wife's face, hoping Chloe would turn, see her husband shivering in the cold and ask her father to stop. But that hope was shattered. Chloe looked straight ahead. Her gaze was blank, as if Derek were an unimportant object on the road, like a streetlight or a trash can. There was no hate in Chloe's eyes, only absolute indifference. The car sped up again. Its tires rolled through a deep puddle, splashing brown mud onto Derek's already soaked pants. Derek stood there, drenched in mud and rainwater, watching in shock as the taillights of that luxury vehicle disappeared around the corner toward the exit gate. He was left alone, feeling a cold that pierced him to the bone. An hour later, Derek finally arrived at the rented apartment he called home, though both the rent and the bills were paid by Chloe. His body shook violently, and his lips were blue. He walked in, slamming the door, expecting to find some warmth or at least a place to vent his emotions. But the scene that greeted him in the living room only gave him a worse headache. The place was a disaster. Huddled on the living room sofa was Mrs. Pamela. Her hair was a mess, and the streaks of running mascara still stained her cheeks. His mother was also soaked. Apparently, she had struggled to get decent transport from the mall. Seeing Derek come home in an equally pitiful state, Mrs. Pamela, instead of asking how he was or bringing him a towel, immediately stood up and unleashed her fury. She pointed at Derek's face and yelled at him, asking where his responsibility as a son was. Mrs. Pamela recounted the mall tragedy, exaggerating how she had been treated like a criminal and turned into the laughingstock of the whole city. She blamed Derek for not controlling his wife, accusing him of being too soft on Chloe, which had given his daughter-in-law the nerve to commit the disrespectful act of repossessing the company car. Mrs. Pamela's shrill screams filled the modestly sized apartment, making Derek's ears ring. Exhausted physically and mentally, Derek couldn't take it anymore. For the first time in his life, he yelled back at his mother. He threw his briefcase on the floor and screamed that all this had happened because of his mother's greed and her desire to show off. Derek said that because his mother couldn't keep her mouth shut about the car's ownership, he had been fired, kicked out, and humiliated in front of the entire Turner family. Mrs. Pamela fell silent for a moment upon hearing the word fired, her eyes wide. But the woman's ego was too big to admit a mistake. Instead, she turned the tables. She said that being fired wouldn't be a problem if Derek were truly as successful and rich as he always bragged about being. The fight between mother and son continued furiously, blaming each other and airing out dirty laundry they had kept hidden behind the mask of a harmonious and prosperous family. The argument only stopped when their stomachs rumbled loudly in unison. Hunger overtook their emotions. They realized they hadn't eaten anything since noon. The luxury food at Mr. Turner's party was a distant memory, and Mrs. Pamela, too busy bragging, hadn't eaten lunch at the mall either. The hunger, combined with the stress and exhaustion of being soaked by the rain, felt painful. Derek let out a long sigh, trying to swallow his pride. He sat on the couch, soaking it with his wet clothes, and pulled out his phone again. He thought about ordering a bunch of expensive fast food to relieve the stress. He figured a delicious meal could at least offer some comfort on this terrible day. Derek opened a food delivery app. His fingers quickly selected a family meal from his favorite fried chicken place. He added several sides and a large drink. The total bill came to nearly $30. Without hesitating, he hit the order button, selecting the saved credit card payment method on the app. The loading circle spun on his phone screen. Derek swallowed hard, imagining the hot, crispy fried chicken. But instead of an order accepted notification, a red error message popped up on the screen. Transaction failed. Payment declined by card issuer. Derek frowned. He thought it might be a network glitch. He tried again. This time he used his second credit card, the platinum card he always bragged about in front of his friends. The result was the same. Declined. A cold sweat began to form on his temples, mixing with the rainwater that hadn't yet dried. He tried every card he had registered, the debit card, the store card, the digital wallet. One by one, they all declined the transaction. That was when reality hit him hard. He suddenly remembered that all those cards were supplementary additional cards, tied to Chloe's main bank account. The entire time, Chloe had funded his lifestyle, and Derek just swiped the plastic. Derek's fingers trembled violently. He opened his mobile banking app to check the balance of his personal account, his payroll account from his job at Mr. Turner's company. The number that appeared on the screen left him powerless. $150. That was all the money he had earned himself. The rest he had already spent last month on installment payments for his mother's home appliances, and that account, moreover, was probably about to be frozen since he had been fired. Derek looked at Mrs. Pamela with a pale face. He stuttered, saying he couldn't use any of the cards, that Chloe had blocked everything. Mrs. Pamela screamed in frustration and threw a couch pillow at Derek, lamenting her fate of having to starve in her own home. As if that suffering wasn't enough, a sharp, continuous beep suddenly sounded from outside the apartment. It was the warning sound that the utility bill was severely past due. Derek and Mrs. Pamela looked at each other with fear-filled eyes. All this time, the bills had been automatically paid by Mr. Turner's personal assistant, who managed his children's logistical needs. Now, there were no such perks. That beep sounded like a ticking time bomb. Derek dug into his pocket for the cash Mr. Turner had given him earlier. The $50 bill was soaked and crumpled. Before he could even think about running to the corner store to try and pay a utility balance, a loud clack echoed. Instantly, all the lights in the house went out. The fan stopped spinning, and the TV went black. Total darkness enveloped them. The rented apartment plunged into pitch black, illuminated only by occasional flashes of lightning seen through the window. In that darkness, the sobs of Mrs. Pamela could be heard. She had started crying like a frightened child. Derek leaned back on the couch in the dark, his stomach aching from hunger, his body shaking from the cold, and his wallet empty. That night, for the first time in his spoiled life, Derek felt what true poverty was like. No food, no power, and no way out. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, in stark contrast to the gloomy atmosphere of Derek's rented apartment, which remained in darkness due to the lack of electricity. With the fan and AC off all night, Derek woke up with a body sticky with sweat. He opened his eyes with a pounding headache. The remnants of stress and hunger from the night before still tormented his body. There was no breakfast prepared on the table, nor the smell of coffee that the domestic staff usually brewed. And worst of all, the water pump also depended on the power grid, so no clean water came out of the bathroom faucet. Forced by circumstance, Derek cleaned himself up with the leftover water in the bathtub, which was already murky, and put back on the work shirt that had been soaked the day before. The shirt, now dry, was wrinkled and smelled musty, and the mud stains on the pants were barely hidden despite his scrubbing them with a damp cloth. He looked in the cracked mirror in the corner and saw his disheveled reflection, red eyes from lack of sleep, and an unkempt, patchy stubble. However, his massive ego still pushed him to go to the office. In his mind, still in denial of reality, he thought yesterday's firing was just an emotional threat from Mr. Turner. He was convinced that if he showed up, apologized, or at least displayed a dedicated work ethic, his father-in-law would soften. The commute to work, which he usually made comfortably in an air-conditioned sedan, became a torture. Derek had to walk to the main boulevard and squeeze onto a packed city bus filled with the smell of sweat from dozens of other commuters. He stood, squished near the doors, trying to keep his shoes from being stepped on while holding back nausea caused by his empty stomach. Arriving in the financial district of downtown LA, Derek walked with forced posture toward the skyscraper owned by Mr. Turner. He adjusted his shirt collar, trying to recover the dignity he had already lost, but the looks from some of his former colleagues he passed on the sidewalk were different. They didn't greet him. Instead, they looked away or smirked while whispering. Apparently, rumors about what happened at the party and his mother's viral video had spread faster than his footsteps. Derek walked into the majestic building lobby with its gleaming marble floors. He headed toward the automatic turnstiles and pulled out the employee badge hanging from his neck. With a motion that had become muscle memory over the past 3 years, he tapped the card against the scanner. Normally, the light turned green and the glass gates opened. But this time, the machine emitted a long, high-pitched buzz, and the light flashed bright red. The words "Access Denied" appeared clearly on the machine's small screen. Derek, feeling shame rising in his throat, swiped the badge again. Once, twice, 3 times. The line of employees behind him began to murmur impatiently. That rejection sound was like a siren announcing his status as a pariah. Before Derek could hit the machine in frustration, 2 heavily built building security guards were already standing in front of him. One of them was the head of security, whom Derek used to boss around to buy him cigarettes or carry his mother's shopping bags. But today, the guard's look was cold and distant, as if viewing a suspicious stranger. The guard didn't greet him. In a firm, neutral voice, he informed Derek that he could not enter the office area. The order came directly from the board of directors, and Derek's name was already on the building's security blacklist. Derek tried to argue, yelling that he wanted to see the HR director to clear up the misunderstanding, but the guard shook his head firmly. The security guard bent down slightly and grabbed a cardboard box from under the reception desk. He shoved the box roughly against Derek's chest. Inside the box were his personal belongings removed from his desk. A picture frame of him and Chloe with cracked glass, a coffee mug that said, "The Boss," a stapler, and a couple of cheap pens. On top of that pile of junk was a sealed white envelope bearing the official company logo. It was his termination letter. With shaking hands, Derek opened the envelope. His eyes scanned the legal terms, harsh but deadly. The reason for termination was printed in bold: gross violation of the Code of Ethics, misuse of corporate assets, and conduct detrimental to the corporate image. There was no severance package, no recommendation letter, just a notice that he would face criminal charges if he did not return all company inventory. Derek stood there, dazed, in the middle of the busy lobby, clutching the box like a robot. He felt naked in front of the hundreds of people walking by. Shame burned from his face to his ears. He turned around and stumbled out of the building, walking away from the place that had once given him identity and pride. He sat on a bench in a nearby park and pulled out his phone. He didn't want to give up. He was sure that with his 3 years of experience at a major corporation, he could easily land a job elsewhere, even at one of Mr. Turner's competitors. With the little cellular data he had left, he started calling acquaintances at rival firms. The first call was to a marketing director at another real estate firm who had tried to recruit him in the past. Derek tried to sound upbeat, greeted him friendly, and asked about his family before expressing his interest in seeking new challenges. But the voice on the other end sounded uncomfortable and rushed. The person cut Derek off and bluntly told him he had already heard what happened. He explained that the corporate world was very small, and rumors about asset embezzlement were poison to anyone's reputation. No reputable company would dare hire someone who had been personally fired by James Turner and had a history of questionable integrity. The person said he was sorry and quickly hung up. Derek called his second, third, and 10th contact. The result was the same. Some didn't answer, others blocked his number immediately, and a few told him flat out that his name was already on the industry HR director's blacklist. Mr. Turner had truly closed every door for him. Derek hadn't just lost his job, he had lost his future. Under the cruel California sun, Derek realized he was now an unemployed man with a toxic reputation, unhirable anywhere. A week had passed since the eviction incident, and Derek's life had sunk into an even deeper pit of hardship. He and his mother survived in their dark rented apartment, selling off their remaining appliances one by one, from the TV to the blender to a local pawn shop for pennies. The money was barely enough to eat 1 sandwich a day and buy candles for light. In the midst of that despair, a process server showed up with a summons. Chloe had officially filed for divorce. Derek read the lawsuit documents with cunning eyes. His manipulative mind didn't see this as the end, but as a golden opportunity. He thought about the division of assets. During their 3 years of marriage, Chloe's wealth and the gifts from Mr. Turner had been substantial. In Derek's logic, since he was her legal husband, he was entitled to half of that fortune. Mrs. Pamela, who was chewing on a cold sandwich in the corner, perked up upon hearing about the asset lawsuit. She whispered poison into her son's ear, urging him to demand a share of the luxury house they used to live in, the cars, and the company shares. Mrs. Pamela convinced Derek that the law would surely side with the husband, and that Chloe wouldn't be cruel enough to leave her ex-husband with nothing. With the last bit of money they had, Derek hired a cheap lawyer with an office in a strip mall on the outskirts of the city, a lawyer who bragged more than he won cases. But Derek had no other choice. He went to court with the vain confidence that he would walk out a new millionaire. The day of the trial arrived. The atmosphere in the family court was formal and cold. Derek put on the best shirt he had left, which fit a bit loose due to his drastic weight loss over the past week. But he tried hard to look as pitiful as possible to win the judge's sympathy. However, his eyes gleamed with greed. On the other side of the room, a door opened, and Chloe walked in. Her appearance was truly different. She looked radiant, elegantly dressed in a navy blue designer dress and a neatly tied silk scarf. Her face was clean, serene, and emanated an aura of determination that Derek had never seen before. Chloe didn't come alone. She was accompanied by the best family law firm in the state, men in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases stuffed with documents. The trial began with the reading of the petition and the response. When it came time to discuss marital assets, Derek's lawyer immediately attacked with an exorbitant demand. He demanded a division of assets worth several $1,000,000, claiming that Derek had contributed to managing the family business and maintaining household stability. Derek even shed crocodile tears, saying he had been inhumanely thrown out without a dime. He demanded compensation for material and emotional damages. Mrs. Pamela, sitting in the gallery, nodded her head. Her eyes sparkled, imagining the money they would receive. But the smile of victory on the faces of Derek and his mother didn't last long. Chloe's lead attorney, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a gaze as sharp as an eagle's, stood up silently. He didn't refute Derek's claims with emotional words, but with data. He requested the court's permission to present evidence from a forensic audit of the household finances during the 3 years of marriage. The lawyer opened a large box containing a stack of bank statements, credit card bills, and wire transfer receipts, as thick as a brick. He began presenting shocking facts. It turned out that during the marriage, Derek had not contributed a single cent to household expenses. His meager salary was always spent entirely on his personal expenses and Mrs. Pamela's lifestyle. Worse still, Chloe's lawyer proved that all the luxurious perks Derek and his mother enjoyed overseas trips, Pamela's designer bags, jewelry, and even the remodeling of his mother's house in her hometown were paid for with the supplementary credit card in Chloe's name. Legally, the use of funds without written permission and outside of reasonable living expenses for a couple was classified as debt. The lawyer presented a summary indicating that the total of Derek and his mother's hedonistic spending amounted to a staggering figure of over $300,000. The courtroom fell silent. The figure was so massive that the judge frowned and looked at Derek with questioning eyes. Derek paled. He tried to argue that they were gifts from his wife, but Chloe finally spoke up with a soft but firm voice. She stated under oath that she had never authorized the use of such a large sum for her mother-in-law's luxuries. She said that, on the contrary, she often had to save up to fund her own business. Chloe revealed she had kept quiet all this time because she wanted to save her marriage, but since Derek had initiated the asset division lawsuit, she had the right to recover her money. Chloe's lawyer filed a counterclaim. He demanded that Derek repay all the money, or that any assets purchased with that money be seized as compensation for damages. The judge's gavel fell with a thunderous sound that echoed like a death sentence for Derek's future. The court, after examining the irrefutable evidence, decided to grant Chloe's divorce petition and dismiss all of Derek's claims for asset division. Furthermore, the judge ruled that Derek's obligation to return the illegally used funds had been proven as collateral. The judge ordered the seizure of any asset in the defendant's or his family's name that was proven to have been purchased with that cash flow. This meant that the deed to Mrs. Pamela's only house in her hometown, whose mortgage had recently been paid off with Chloe's credit card money, would be seized by the state for auction. Upon hearing the verdict, Mrs. Pamela screamed hysterically in the courtroom. Her body convulsed, and her eyes bulged out, as if she couldn't believe her own greed had become a boomerang destroying the last assets she owned. She fainted on the courtroom floor, causing a massive commotion. Derek sat frozen in his chair, his body devoid of strength, as if his bones had been removed. He looked at Chloe, hoping to see some pity in the eyes of the woman who once loved him. But Chloe had already stood up, smoothed her clothes, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back even once. Behind her, medical staff rushed in to take Mrs. Pamela away. Meanwhile, Derek realized he had just dug his own grave. He came in to get rich, but he was leaving as a destitute man with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. After the judge's gavel strike in family court, Derek and Mrs. Pamela's lives took a 180-degree turn. The execution of the asset seizure was much faster and crueler than they had imagined. The only house in their hometown, which she had always boasted about as a symbol of her son's success in the big city, now bore a glaring red sign reading foreclosed by the state. With nowhere to return to, no assets to mortgage, and no money in the bank to rent a decent place. They were left on the street. They were forcefully evicted from their previous rented apartment for failing to pay rent for 2 consecutive months, and were now stranded in a heavily overpopulated, run-down trailer park on the outskirts of the city. Their new residence was at the end of a narrow, damp alleyway, where sunlight barely reached, blocked by the touching roofs. The walls of the shack were bare cinder blocks, unplastered. The tin roof leaked everywhere, creating moisture stains on the ceiling, and the air inside was suffocating, mixed with the smell of stagnant sewage right outside the rotting wooden door. In that cramped space, luxury was a forgotten word. There was no longer a plush spring mattress to comfort their backs, no air conditioning to cool their skin. Just a thin mat on the cold concrete floor served as a bed for both. Every night, they had to sleep hungry, accompanied by the buzzing of fierce mosquitoes and the loud scurrying of rats running across the ceiling. Mrs. Pamela, who once always looked splendid thanks to $1,000 facial treatments and designer clothes, now looked like a completely different person. Her face was dull and greasy, and the wrinkles caused by stress and malnutrition began to appear prominently and deeply. Her hair, once carefully styled at expensive salons, now hung limp and smelled musty, carelessly tied back with a rubber band from a takeout box. There were no more high society friends to praise her, only neighbors who looked at her with suspicion. Every day, Mrs. Pamela had to get up before the break of dawn, not to do her usual morning workout or prepare for a country club meeting, but because she had started working as a laundress and cleaning lady for her neighbors, most of whom were factory workers. To avoid starving, this fake ex-society lady had to stoop to doing the hard labor she once deeply despised. Her hands, once soft and only used to holding porcelain teacups, were now rough, calloused, and cracked from exposure to the cheap bleach that burned her skin. She often cried alone in public washrooms while scrubbing stains out of other people's clothes, lamenting her fate of having to become the servant of people she once considered of low economic status. But her neighbors showed her no pity. On the contrary, they often mocked and scolded her for her slow, sloppy work, and for constantly complaining about the quality of the laundry soap. Derek's situation wasn't much better. In fact, one could say he suffered a more severe mental breakdown than his mother. His college degree from a prestigious university, which he once felt proud of whenever he applied for a job, was now worth less than fast food wrapping paper. The stigma of being a dishonest employee, an embezzler of assets, and someone dishonorably discharged from Mr. Turner's massive corporation meant he was instantly rejected by every company. Even small businesses needing clerical staff were reluctant to hire someone with a track record of integrity as poor as Derek's. The corporate world had firmly shut its doors to him. Finally, in order to eat, Derek had to swallow the enormous pride he once held. He took odd jobs as a lumper at the city's wholesale produce market. Every night until sunrise, Derek had to haul 100-pound sacks of rice, vegetables, and onions from delivery trucks to the merchant's stalls. His back, which used to rest comfortably in an ergonomic chair in an air-conditioned office, was now scratched, bruised, and hunched from bearing the heavy loads that tortured his spine. His skin, once carefully maintained, was now sunburned, dark, greasy, and caked with dirt that was hard to wash off, even with soap. His feet, once wrapped in polished leather shoes, now wore only thin, patched-up flip-flops. Walking on the wet market floor littered with rotting garbage, Derek often had to fight with other, stronger lumpers for a loading job, and was frequently pushed into the mud, becoming the laughingstock of the market folk, who had no idea he was once an arrogant young executive. Every time Derek returned to the shack with a broken body and barely enough pocket change to buy a couple of cheap bologna sandwiches, the atmosphere at home, far from offering the peace of rest, welcomed him with a new hell. Fights between mother and son became an unavoidable routine. Mrs. Pamela, unable to accept her difficult life, continued to blame Derek for all her suffering. In a shrill voice, she cursed Derek for being a useless, stupid son who didn't know how to take care of his rich, good wife, Chloe. She kept bringing up the past, saying that if Derek had been smarter to win Mr. Turner's favor and hadn't been so honest about the car, they wouldn't have ended up in this dump. Blind, physically and mentally exhausted, Derek no longer accepted the reprimands, as he did when he was an obedient son. His respect for his mother had been completely eroded by bitter reality. He responded to his mother's insults with much crueler and more hurtful words. He screamed in her face that all this was karma for Mrs. Pamela's arrogant mouth and ostentatious lifestyle, wanting to look rich with a stolen Mercedes. Derek blamed his mother's greed for pushing him to commit petty corruption and lies that ultimately cost him his job, his wife, and his future. Their hateful screaming matches often ended with the breaking of plastic plates or door slamming, prompting next-door neighbors to bang on the walls and threaten to kick them out if they kept making noise in the middle of the night. In that cramped, hot, and suffocating space, the affection between mother and son had vanished without a trace, replaced by mutual hatred, blame, and a deep regret that was already too late to fix. They were trapped together in the pit of poverty they had dug for themselves, with no hope of ever climbing out. A year had passed since the storm of ruin struck Derek and his mother, erasing every trace of the fake luxury they once enjoyed. Time marched on, indifferent to their miserable fate. On the other hand, for those who were patient and honest, time brought sweet rewards. That afternoon, at a fine dining restaurant located in the most exclusive business district in Los Angeles, the atmosphere was cool, quiet, and elegant. The restaurant was known as a meeting place for successful entrepreneurs and high society. The marble floor gleamed, reflecting the light from the crystal chandeliers, and the aroma of prime steaks and gourmet coffee filled the perfectly climate-controlled air. Soft, instrumental jazz music played in the background, adding a touch of class to the venue. At one of the best tables, situated next to a large window overlooking the main boulevard, sat Chloe and her father, CEO James Turner. Chloe's appearance was far more charming and dignified than a year ago. She was elegantly dressed in a modern designer dress that perfectly matched a softly patterned silk scarf. Her face was clean and naturally radiant, emanating unmistakable inner peace and happiness. There was no longer a trace of sadness, mental pressure, or puffy eyes, unlike when she was Derek's oppressed wife. Chloe was now a complete, independent, and respected woman. Today was a special celebration. Chloe had just inaugurated the 5th branch of her fashion boutique, which had become a trend among young women. The business started fresh with her own capital, and her father's strategic guidance had grown very rapidly in a short time. She had proven to the world, and especially to herself, that she could stand firmly on her own 2 feet without the shadow of her father's big name. Mr. Turner looked at his daughter with overflowing pride and affection. The elderly gentleman looked healthy. His smile was broad and free as he listened to Chloe enthusiastically talk about her business expansion plans to enter the export market in neighboring countries. They laughed together, enjoying a chocolate cake dessert, celebrating a true victory in life. For Mr. Turner, seeing his daughter free herself from a harmful parasite and become a strong woman was an incalculable joy, much more valuable than any luxury car he could have bought. In the midst of their warm and laughing conversation, Chloe's gaze casually drifted toward the massive window beside them. The thick, soundproof glass perfectly separated 2 opposite worlds: the quiet, fragrant, and luxurious world inside the restaurant, and the loud, hot, dusty, and cruel world outside. On the sidewalk of the avenue in front of the restaurant, there was a major traffic jam due to the lunch rush. Chloe spotted a small altercation in an illegal parking zone, not far from the restaurant's lobby entrance. An illegal valet attendant, wearing a torn, grease-stained old orange safety vest, was being harshly reprimanded by the owner of a luxury sedan who claimed his car had been scratched by a passing motorcycle. The parking attendant bowed his head deeply, begging for forgiveness with a very miserable and frightened gesture. He clasped his hands in front of his chest repeatedly, pleading not to be hit or reported to the police. The parking attendant's skin was dark, burned by the scorching sun. His hair was messy and long, full of street dust, and his body was very thin, like someone suffering from chronic malnutrition. His cheekbones protruded sharply, and his eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles. Chloe narrowed her eyes, trying to recognize a familiar figure behind that ragged appearance. The next instant, Chloe was startled. It was Derek, her ex-husband, who once always looked impeccable in pressed shirts, elegant suits, and expensive watches. Now he was standing on the hot asphalt without decent shoes, taking insults and spit from another person over a $2 tip. Chloe's heart shuddered. But the tremble wasn't due to residual love or emerging nostalgia, but a strange pity like what one feels when seeing a suffering stranger. Chloe's gaze shifted to the sidewalk across from where Derek was. There, an old woman in old clothes and faded pajamas sat on her knees. She was selling small packets of tissues and face masks to passers-by with a pitiful expression. Her face was covered in street dust and sweat. Her wrinkles had grown deeper, but Chloe could still very clearly recognize Mrs. Pamela's features, the woman who once proudly flaunted her knockoff bags in shopping malls and insulted Chloe at every country club meeting, calling her barren and stupid, now had to hold her hand out on the street, hoping for people's pity to buy a pack of tissues for $1. The scene contrasted too much with Chloe's last memory of them. It was as if an invisible thread, or perhaps fate, wanted to show her the end of the play. Derek, who had just been scolded by the car owner, turned his head toward the luxury restaurant building. Perhaps he wanted to escape the blistering sun for a moment, or perhaps he just wanted to look at the comfortable life he could no longer enjoy. His eyes pierced through the clear glass and met directly with Chloe's, who was looking at him. For Derek, time seemed to stop. He froze on the spot. His feet seemed nailed to the hot asphalt. Derek saw his ex-wife sitting in there, so beautiful, clean, radiant, and happy. He saw Chloe surrounded by the luxury he once felt and wasted. He saw that the delicious food on Chloe's table probably cost as much as his 3-month income from hauling sacks and parking cars. The shame, extreme regret, and collapse of his ego hit Derek's chest so hard that he lost his breath and felt nauseous. He saw clearly what he had thrown overboard to follow his mother's irrational pride and greed. He wanted to scream. He wanted to call out to Chloe. He wanted to run inside, get on his knees, and beg to be allowed to go back to the past. But he realized that this thick glass was a wall of fate he could no longer cross. He was just dust on the outside, while Chloe was a diamond in the showcase. Derek saw that Mrs. Pamela had also turned around and was covering her mouth in shock. Tears of regret ran down her dirty, wrinkled cheeks. Chloe held Derek's tear-filled gaze for a few long seconds. On Chloe's face, there was no anger, no smile of satisfied mockery, nor burning vengeance. There was only an expressionless, serene look, the look of someone seeing a past that has ended and no longer has the slightest place in her life. Chloe slowly looked away, unilaterally breaking that eye contact. She looked back at her father. Mr. Turner had also noticed Derek's presence outside, but chose to give it no importance. Mr. Turner simply nodded and smiled at his daughter, a silent signal that it had all passed. Chloe returned her father's smile softly and then, with an elegant and decisive gesture, called the restaurant waiter over. When the waiter approached, Chloe asked him to close the window drapes, as the sunlight was too glaring. The waiter nodded politely and slowly pulled the curtain cord. The thick gold fabric descended inch by inch, slowly hiding the view of the street, blocking Derek's view of Chloe, and separating the bright light inside the restaurant from the painful heat outside. The curtain closed firmly, and for Chloe, the book of her past also closed forever. Meanwhile, for Derek and his mother, living in regret was a prison without bars that they would have to endure until the day they died. 5 years is not a short time for the wheel of fate to make a full turn. In a modest diner on the outskirts of the produce market, Derek sat, lost in thought, with a blank stare. His appearance was now much older than his actual age. His hair, once thick and black, was now grey and thinning in spots. The skin on his face was weather-beaten, and his teeth were yellowed from smoking too much to relieve stress. He wore a faded political campaign t-shirt and worn-out shorts. In front of him was a cup of watery black coffee and a cold, stale donut, the only breakfast he could afford, before going back to his job loading vegetables. The noise of the market and the shouts of the merchants sounded like the background music to his gloomy life. Derek's attention shifted when the diner owner turned up the volume on an old tube TV placed on a dusty shelf. The morning news was broadcasting a special report profiling an inspiring businesswoman who had triumphed in the global market. Derek's heart seemed to stop when he saw the face that appeared on the screen. It was Chloe, but the Chloe he saw on TV was very different from the one he knew. She looked so elegant, dignified, and radiant, with an aura of true happiness. Chloe was being interviewed in the courtyard of a massive estate, much larger than Mr. Turner's old house, surrounded by a beautiful flower garden. The camera focused on the figure standing next to Chloe, a handsome man with a kind smile and a tender gaze, holding an adorable toddler in his arms. It was Chloe's new husband, a renowned architect known for being a deeply religious and family-oriented person. In the interview, Chloe, with bright eyes, said that her success was due to the prayers and support of her current husband, who always treated her like a queen and never asked for anything more than their happiness together. Chloe also mentioned that, as a dedication moving on from her dark past, she had just created a social foundation to help women suffering from family abandonment. In that success story, Derek's name wasn't mentioned a single time. To Chloe, Derek had been completely erased from history. He was nothing more than a small pebble she tripped over before she could finally run at full speed. Derek felt immense pressure in his chest, as if a large boulder was crushing his lungs. He saw how perfect Chloe's life was. He now saw true love in the eyes of her new husband, something Derek never gave her, too busy chasing his mother's pride. Regret hit him like a massive wave hitting a rock, but this time, the wave drowned him. Derek remembered Mrs. Pamela, who had been bedridden for a year, paralyzed in their cramped, rented apartment after suffering a mild stroke. His mother, once so arrogant, now only cried and babbled in her sleep, spending her old age in an adult diaper that was rarely changed due to lack of money, and with none of her high society friends ever coming to visit her. With trembling hands, Derek left a few coins on the diner table and stood up, leaving behind the television broadcast that still showed the happy laughter of Chloe's little family. He walked out into the damp hustle of the market and hoisted another heavy sack of onions onto his shoulders. A light drizzle began to fall, hiding the tears that finally rolled down Derek's cheeks. He realized that the harshest punishment wasn't poverty, but the awareness that he once held a diamond in his hands, but threw it away for a rock he thought was gold. Now he had to spend the rest of his life watching someone else's happiness from afar. While he wandered in the maze of endless regret, her story ended with justice perfectly written by fate.